Hi everyone, welcome back. We are filming episode 2 of our Kashmir series today in season 3. And again, my name is Taha.
My name is Lubaba.
And we have with us, very generous with their time, Shehroze Shaikh, who is a professor, a historian of colonization and surveillance in South Asia.
Yeah.
Just casual, fun things to research.
And produce content about.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for being with us again, Shehroze. Also, if you're watching The Third Take, which is the name of our podcast, in case you didn't know and you just tuned in to something.
This is The Third Take.
Yeah, please follow us. You can follow us on Instagram at The Third Take Pod. You can also listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, everywhere you find podcasts. And let's get started. Lababa.
Yeah. So, Shehroze, the last time, when we left off, we were talking about the Jammu massacre. Mm-hmm. And so can you just sort of take us back to that and just give us a TLDR and a little recap of the whole event, and then maybe we can get into a handful of the questions that we want to guide our conversation today.
Of course. So one of the things that whenever you have to produce a colonial narrative that justifies occupation, justifies illegal capture of land, etc., like colonizing entities have this tendency to produce ahistorical narratives. Or when I say ahistorical, that doesn't necessarily mean they have no basis in reality, in historical fact, but the fact that they manipulate historical facts to fit an agenda that makes sense. So a lot of times when the Indian state, which occupies a large portion of Kashmir, produces their version of Kashmir's history, it often starts at the so-called invasion of Kashmir, tribal Mujahideen across the Pakistani border. That's where it usually starts. That's where the history starts, right? One of the things that slips through the cracks in a lot of that understanding is the Jammu massacre that precedes the invasion from the Mujahideen and the tribal, irregular forces from the Pakistani border. So the Jammu massacre, it happens in October 1947. RSS militias, which are backed by the government of India and also in collaboration with the forces of the Maharaja of Kashmir. Let's preface a little bit with the RSS. It's this proto-fascist organization which believes in a mythic Indian past that was Hindu-dominated, believes in a version of history that is believes in a version of Indian history that is of a Hindu India, and with the RSS is the ideological parent of the current ruling party in India, which is the BJP, which harkens back to this idea of this greater Indian civilization that you harken back to, and then you want to put in place again. So the basis of most nationalisms, which is this glorious past that you want to get back for yourself.
Yeah, this greater India.
Basically, Akhand Bharat that we talked about the last time in the episode, right? So RSS militias, in collaboration with the Maharaja's forces, commit a large-scale massacre of Muslim Kashmiris, and the numbers, again, with events like these, the fact that it happened is always most important than the number of casualties. But from official sources, it's 10,000, 20,000. Kashmiri sources claim anywhere between 200, 250,000. So that's a large number of people, right?
Yeah. Some sources, in Azad Isa's book, they even say it could be up to 300,000.
Up to 300,000, yes.
Which is absolutely insane, considering the fact that this narrative completely... I was recently watching a BBC little segment on Kashmir, and they also started the history from tribal militias came from across the Pakistani border and started attacking Indian Kashmir or Jammu and Kashmir, and it completely erases, as you said, what happened before that, which is the Jammu massacre.
200,000, 250,000, those are genocidal numbers.
Yes. In fact, there is if someone's interested in reading more about this or accessing resources on this, there is a website called jammugenocide.org. I think that's what the website is. It aims to create a understanding and awareness of the history of this massacre and through testimonies, stuff like that. So if anyone's interested, they should definitely visit that. But who would have thought the BBC would manipulate historical facts about the history of South Asia?
Wow, crazy.
The British Broadcasting Corporation would do that?
Wow, the British?
Wow.
Crazy. So let's bring it back, Shehroze.
Yeah.
You and I were talking about how there's almost this desire to be Kashmiri that's internalized by a lot of non-Kashmiri Indians. Can you sort of speak to that and how it sort of relates to this consolidation of occupation of both on both sides of the border?
Yeah. So again, consolidation of occupation starts happening like again the early
consolidation of occupation.
Consolidation of occupation, consolidation of occupation, consolidation of occupation. Yeah. You say it enough times, it becomes real.
Crazy.
So yeah, the consolidation sort of follows the early 1950s. Both countries are trying to draft constitutions in the middle of this constitutional crisis. Pakistan definitely is in the middle of a constitutional crisis in its early years. India and Pakistan also go to war in 48. Again, the story of that war always tends to begin with tribal militias from Pakistan sort of invading Kashmir. But in the context of the Jammu massacre, that makes a little more sense because to escape a lot of the genocidal violence that is happening in Jammu, a lot of Kashmiri Muslims, they end up fleeing to Pakistani sides of Punjab or the Gilgit agency and stuff like that, and they bring stories of what's happened, right?
Okay, I'm understanding.
Which again, I would explain this the same way Hafsa Kanjwal sort of explains this is like these are at a time when communal violence is happening on both sides in the wake of the partition. These stories of like Kashmiri migrants coming into the Punjab, they do like cause a lot of stir among Pakistani Muslims.
They rile people up, which is like what. That's human.
Yes.
Yeah.
And does the Pakistani government sort of like ride on that wave, hoping to sort of like institutionalize itself into Kashmir, like make advances in Kashmir? Yes, right? But it's also important to take into its entire context, right? Nation-state violence does happen, but like the ground realities are also like people's emotions and feelings are also historical drivers in that sense, right?
It's true. That's a really great point. Like the oral histories carry a special type of significance, right?
Yeah,
like
for sure.
These add to our archives in a way that text isn't always going to.
Yeah, for sure. So following the war carries on for like about a year, 1949, there's a ceasefire that happens. There's a ceasefire line that gets drawn up, and that's the de facto border until the issue sort of like gets resolved. I think we talked a bit about this in the previous episode as well,
the line
right?
of control, basically.
The line of control
it's
and how it's
a ceasefire line. It's not technically an internationally recognized border.
Yeah, which is why
recognized ceasefire line.
Yeah, which is why most of the firing and the shelling that happens on an everyday basis across in Kashmir, whether it's on the Pakistani side or the Indian side, it happens along the LOC because that way you can get away with it. It's not an internationally recognized border.
Oh, I see.
It won't like it won't cause like the same level of scrutiny that it would if you were firing across a internationally recognized border. But what happens is Kashmiris on either side of the border lose their lives, right? In nation-state violence.
That's what's fair.
That's what's fair, right? Those lives don't matter in the larger scheme of things when nation-states have their own political designs, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like whose lives matter in a fight for power.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's the interesting sort of segue into what happened recently, the war that happened like 3 weeks ago between Pakistan and India and in Kashmir. A lot of people were even criticizing the media outpour on it by saying that the reason why it's getting so much attention is because India has now crossed the border over the Pakistani and Indian Punjab
Pakistan proper
into Pakistan proper. Because that is a border that is recognized internationally, whereas the LOC or line of control is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like if you go to India and you use Google Maps, like it'll show you a different map of India versus like in Pakistan. And Google does that with many countries. And
I did not know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure because I was reading about that recently, and it's very interesting, which is why the line of control is a ceasefire line, and then what happened recently with missiles coming into Pakistan, it caused more of an uproar.
Because it was India again claimed that they were targeting terrorist camps on the Pakistani side of the border. Again, like you have to take a lot of these claims with a pinch of salt, especially in the context of like global war and terror narratives, how like the label of terrorism has been used against like a lot of countries to sort of like violate their sovereignty, etc., etc. Investigations are still undergoing. Claims have been made on both sides, but that was why it led to such a strong response from the Pakistani side as well, because they attacked Pakistan proper this time.
Right, like it's uncontested.
Basically. But to your earlier question about consolidation of the occupation on both sides of the border, so once the ceasefire line gets sort of drawn up, Pakistan and India both have military control of like their parts of Kashmir. In that sense, Pakistan, because it's in the middle of a constitutional crisis, it doesn't necessarily worry too much at the time about giving Kashmir some sort of constitutional status or not.
It's just
And primarily, Pakistan also recognized that because the Indian government also refused to hold a referendum on their side, they're basically like, they didn't want to weaken their case on Kashmir by formalizing it as part of Pakistan proper, right? Because the agreement was that it is a contested territory in that sense. So by formalizing the Pakistani administered sides of Kashmir into itself, Pakistan would weaken its case internationally, but that's why they don't really focus on it. India, on the other hand, does like try to stamp its like power on the ground and build it into some constitutional form, because India is much more serious in its early years about drafting a constitution than Pakistan is at the time, right? The Indian constitution passes in 1949, I believe. Pakistan doesn't have a proper constitution in 1972.
Oh, wow.
And I would say that Pakistan is still in a constitutional crisis.
For sure.
Wow.
We're consistent.
Yes.
If there's one thing we are as a country, we're consistent.
We're consistent in crisis.
Born in a constitutional crisis, we're in a constitutional crisis, and we are in a constitutional crisis.
Yes.
I do hope that we don't remain in one in
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah, it would be nice for you to not
Yeah.
be buried in one.
Yes. Yes.
No, absolutely. Like
To
I
quote,
think.
yes.
Sorry, to quote who?
To quote Pakistani singer Shehzad Roy, when I was 10, I heard that Pakistan was at a like sensitive like time in its history.
Yeah.
When I was 20, I heard that Pakistan was in a sensitive time in its history.
I see.
Like
Okay.
it's always a sensitive time. It's always a Nazik mode.
It's like Canadian elections. Like, this could be the most important election of our lifetime.
Yes. Until the next one.
Yes.
Except that, imagine you're also in a constitutional crisis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, basically.
So I would also say that this part that you mentioned, Shehroze, is so important because a lot of the times people don't understand why India and Pakistan didn't just say like, okay, well, we have this part of Kashmir, you have that part of Kashmir, and Pakistan, because of the constitutional crisis, among other things, just never really formalized its position. And you're already going to talk about it, so I'll let you talk about what India did in the Indian occupied Kashmir.
Yeah. So what India ends up doing is through a series of like agreements with like local Kashmiri leaders or through some presidential orders, it tries to formalize a relationship with Kashmir.
Okay.
It grants Kashmir what's called special status.
Like semi-autonomous?
Semi-autonomous status, whereby Kashmir is...
Sorry, who granted this?
So the Indian government, in agreement with like Kashmiri politicians who were more like
inclined towards India.
India, they grant Kashmir this like semi-autonomous status, whereby Kashmir is part of the union in that sense, but it is also semi-autonomous. What that means on the ground is that any provisions of the Indian constitution or any laws that are passed by the Indian Parliament in the center in Delhi will not be applied to Kashmir unless the Kashmiri Legislative Assembly passes them as well,
so
agrees to become party to it, except in 3 areas. And this is where it becomes a little reminiscent of colonial policy towards princely states as well. Sounds good until, which is defense, foreign policy, and communication. Now think back to the policy that the colonial government used to have towards princely states. It was very much the same, right? You have power over what you want to do within your state's internal matters, yes, sure. But in terms of defense, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of communications, so railways, transportation, postal networks, etc., anything that stamps the government's authority on the ground, you have to agree to the center, right? So this is in place, but there are caveats as well. Again, what ends up happening over what has sort of happened in the 70 years since has this slow chipping away at Kashmir's special status. So one of the ways in which they do that is through presidential orders or through what's called the governor's rule or the president's rule, where you dissolve the local parliament, the local assembly, local elected leaders, and you put it under the
parent government.
The federal government.
Under the federal governments, right? So that's what ends up happening. Kashmir has gone through more periods of presidential or governor rule in India than any other state, right? So again, special status indeed, right? And through these presidential orders, through these like bypasses of the local government, by 1999, out of 395 provisions of the Indian Constitution, 260 had already been applied to Kashmir without really taking the Kashmiri local government into account. Maybe not all of them. I'm maybe missing some, but like through some collaboration or some.
Yeah, there was a large impact by them.
Yeah, and at the same time, in India there's something called a union list, which is essentially areas of governance that only the central government has control over. There are 97 articles in that union list. 92 had already been applied to Kashmir by 1999, right? So again, extending its like chipping away at that autonomous state.
Yeah.
So by the time
really leaning into the semi.
Yes.
Yeah.
The semi is more important than the autonomous, obviously. The pre-hyphen is always more important, right? So through these like presidential orders, Kashmir sort of agrees to stay in the union. And when I say agrees, it's like the collaborative elite, the collaborative like politicians, they agree to figure out a system in which they think this system can work while we are under this military occupation with India, right? So that gets formalized in 1953 or 54, I believe, and that's when like these Kashmir enters this like period where for 10 years, I believe it's I'm forgetting the first name, but like the last name is Bakshi. He is the de facto ruler of Kashmir like, at the time, and he is someone who is very much. Again, you have to look at it as a colonial subject, colonial state relationship where you are not necessarily very happy with the people, with your overlords, but you are also very interested in maintaining your own power through like ensuring that you use your local power on the ground to get some benefits from them, some perks from them. So this state subject rule sort of like persists in that sense.
If I may interject here, this almost reminds me, and I think it would remind a lot of our viewers about Palestine, because if you look at the West Bank, you have something called the Palestinian Authority there. Technically, the Palestinian Authority is a representative of the Palestinian people in the West Bank, right, which is a part of Palestine, currently under occupation by Israel. The Palestinian Authority cannot hold a referendum tomorrow, or if they try to do it, Israel will not let them, to talk about their own sovereignty and their ability to be a sovereign people, sovereign nation. The Palestinian Authority cannot control what gets censored and what doesn't get censored, right? So for instance, Israeli leaders make it a point to say, look at the Palestinian Authority, they are just not able to develop their own areas, blah, 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 right? But then it's like, when it comes to actual issues on at hand, Al Jazeera was recently banned from operating in the West Bank. Who made that decision? It was the Israeli military. So you have to kind of question that even when it comes to Kashmir, like sure, under the Bakshi rule, whatever, you have this legislative assembly, which is just a legislative assembly for Kashmir, like a little parliament that's local to them, but do they even have power? Or can the federal government from India just come in at any time and cut off telephone connections? There's a media blackout, right? Like this is not something that has been happening for a while.
And it does happen.
Exactly. And I think like I just wanted to bring that point in because Kashmir recently got a lot of attention also because of Palestine and how interconnected the struggles are. And how many, like even for Azad Issa's book, Hostile Homelands, the foreword is written by a Palestinian journalist. I think it's Lina Al-Fasen.
I believe so.
So it really shows us how, if it's hard for people to conceptualize what we're saying, it's actually very similar to what's being done to Palestinians.
And again, there's technological exchange that puts that into practice as well, right? There's a lot of like, not just exchange in terms of technology, but in terms of knowledge sharing as well, right? Again, we keep thinking about when it comes to the military-industrial complex of Palestine being this like military research lab sort of, right? Where weapons are tested and like then marketed to the rest of the world as like battle tested, as tested on human populations, etc., right? A lot of these post 2008, a lot of these weaponry, a lot of these mechanisms, a lot of this knowledge sharing has found like a market in India. And that has been, a lot of that has been through the very concerted efforts of like Israeli diplomats to sort of build desire for these technologies and this kind of like occupational knowledge in India.
I mean, Indian police officers train in
The
Israel.
Mumbai police trains with the IDF.
Specifically. Also, in Azad Isa's book, again, going back to his book, he talks about how there's Indian universities that now have like tech exchanges or like formalized agreements with memorandum of understandings with Israeli tech universities. And it really just shows you, and it's not just this like symbolic stuff like, oh, officers are training. Like India is actually the biggest purchaser of Israeli arms exports, like over 40% at this point. India uses the same surveillance technology at the line of control and in Kashmir that Israel uses along the border with Gaza and along the border with West Bank. So there's a lot of overlap there as well.
For sure.
And also the fact that they're working together, these universities are doing this tech exchange, it's clearly a long-term strategy, right? Like they're going for retention, they're going for sustainability. They're going for, we are going to be prepared for anything. They're building an army together. That's really what it is, right?
And one
like
of the
that's the reality
biggest,
of it.
No, you're so right, Gawaba. So India for the longest time tried to maintain this position like we're neutral when it comes to Israel-Palestine, but we support the Palestinian people's right of self-determination, right? But then I think the reason why India has also felt emboldened to move more closer towards Israel is the fall of Soviet Union, which we can talk about. And then the 90s come and capitalism takes a hold of India, corporatization of Indian economy. And then you have also the fact that the Arab states in the 90s, well, Egypt normalized relations early on in the 70s, I believe, but like with Jordan, and then you have the recent Abraham Accords. So Indian diplomats have also openly said, or have said in letters and memos to the Indian government, that if there are Arab nations that are now normalizing relations, like we need to do that too and still be okay. So it's like a very weird, sick, broader picture at play, and the people that get left behind or get hurt the most are like Kashmiris, Palestinians.
Yes. Basically, people under occupation, people who don't necessarily get a say how these diplomatic like ties are built or on what basis they're built.
I wanted to come back to the leadership of Bakshi. What time period was that?
So this would roughly fall into 1953 to 1963, essentially. And this is also the time when there's a lot of, 50s and 60s there's a lot of concerted effort from the Indian government to sort of create a image of Kashmir for non-Kashmiri Indians, for citizens of India proper, essentially. That revolves around incorporating Kashmir into historic studies of Indian history in terms of paying some form of attention to its Hindu past, to imagery of Kashmir through Bollywood films, etc., etc. So Kashmir Ki Kali is like this very iconic 60s film that is shot in Kashmir. So it creates this desire, this recognition of Kashmir, this Hafsa Kanjwal sort of calls this like the period where this idea of Kashmir being an integral part and a toot ang of India sort of gets established, right? And what are the ground mechanisms through which that is done? So education, like media, culture, etc., etc. All of these avenues create a image, a desire for Kashmir in the minds of like citizens of India proper.
I see.
Very much like indoctrination.
Very much so. They would call it nation building, state building. So Jawaharlal Nehru was the first and the longest, I believe the longest reigning Prime Minister of India post-partition.
Modi's coming for that gig.
Modi is really coming for that gig, for sure. So Nehru is this... The figure, the image of Nehru across the world is this like leader of the non-aligned movement, doesn't fall on the Soviet side, doesn't fall on the American side in the Cold War, wants
representative of the global South.
Yes, basically. Leader of this non-aligned movement, third world countries that are going to put themselves first and not get caught away, all of that. But at the same time, Nehru is internally, again, there's external images, there's in Urdu,
the man was so whitewashed.
For sure. Again, colonially educated like Hindu Brahmin elite. What do you expect,
it's
right?
Giving like
It's giving Usha Vance.
It's giving like global leaders that have been diplomats and or worked at the World Bank that then become leaders and bring those practices
It's giving
to their
Kamala.
world.
Absolutely.
Who are, not
It's
to
giving
name
what?
names.
Kamala.
It's giving Kamala Harris.
Yeah, exactly.
Nehru claims Kashmiri descent. I believe he is of Kashmiri descent. And a lot of historians, again, as a historian, I have disagreements with a lot of people's arguments, but again, they are arguments that are based on some form of research, so I have to quote them in some way or the other. A lot of historians do take the Kashmir issue largely as an issue that cannot be separated from Nehru's own image of his own descent. He could not imagine an India that does not include Kashmir because he himself was of Kashmiri descent as well, right?
I see.
And he was part of that. We talked in the previous episode about this Brahmanical Indian elite historical construction of like Kashmir as a place with a mythic Hindu past that has been overtaken by Muslims. So Nehru falls in that line as well, and he writes about Kashmir as this beautiful woman whose beauty is something that he wants to attain, but is at the same time otherworldly. So again, follows
Fetishization.
fetishization of Kashmir in that sense, right? This deification of the female body, the Bharat Mata, and Kashmir being a representative of that deification. And it also follows a lot of colonial rhetoric about the global south, which is, this is such beautiful space, it's only the people that are uncivilized, and that's why we need to be here to make sure that this space reaches its potential, because these barbarians won't be able to reach that potential themselves. So there's that understanding as well. There's that colonial gaze over Kashmir, and there's this imagination of Kashmir being the crown of the Bharat Mata that is like
it's very patriarchal.
Indian.
It is, and I think it's fetishization, and we see it in Bollywood as well, the way that they portray Kashmiri women or Pakistani women. That's a whole other episode we can do on this. But I would also say that some people counter your point by saying, well, it's different because Nehru is Indian, right? Like there are people in India who are Indian that are talking about an Indian or a territory in the Indian subcontinent. And I find that to be also really problematic because again, if we believe that, then, and we say Nehru or this idea of like Kashmir as a beautiful woman or this untouched land, whatever, it's not like the Western colonization of global South because Nehru is Indian. It's like, but then you're falling prey to the whole Akhand Bharat narrative of like, it's all India.
Yeah.
I see.
And like, just because my family and our lineage is Muslim, I don't know if we were Muslim like 3 centuries ago or 5 centuries ago, right?
Okay, my family is Muslim. They still remember their Hindu names.
Okay,
Wow.
so
Right?
there you go.
So it's recent enough for our elders to remember what their Hindu names were before their conversions, right? So like
That's such a good example, Shehroze, because like that doesn't make you any less indigenous to where you live in South Asia.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point that people forget is that it's a huge territory, all of Indian subcontinent, and you can't just I can't just go to Bangladesh and start saying, oh, because I'm South Asian, I deserve to live here. I'm not Bengali. And I think like this narrative is very easy for people to comprehend when it comes to demonizing Muslims and Muslim countries, but not when it comes to reckoning with what the Indian state has been doing in its current
For sure. A democracy that creates states of exception is a problematic that you have to contend with. And in that same stead, yes, you can say by virtue of being an Indian, like Nehru has some sort of claim, or India proper has some sort of claim over Kashmir, but explain the insurgency movements then, right? The fact that there is a strong indigenous resistance movement, and the fact that there, even outside of armed struggle, there have been like political struggles that peaceful political
society,
civil society
which is
struggles.
in prison right now mostly.
For sure.
But
that have struggled for autonomy or outright independence as a whole. And unification with the rest of Kashmir as well, right? People would take, that is an argument that you face, but you do come across, but you have to take that into account. You have to take into account the fact that there is indigenous resistance movement in Kashmir. There has always been since the 1940s, since and there is a sense of self that a large majority of Kashmiris have about what they see as their political future.
Yeah, like they're like, we're not Pakistani, we're not Indian, we're Kashmiris.
Yeah,
and
for
I think
sure.
that is so valid.
Yeah.
And the fact that this one sentence is so controversial in India and Pakistan, and I would say, to be very honest, more so in India right now, it's diabolical.
It is.
No, it absolutely is. People deserve their own autonomy.
Yeah, for sure. And there's nuances as well, right? So, for example, if you see the pre-partition larger state, princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, there's part of it includes what's now the semi-autonomous region of Gilgit-Baltistan in Pakistan, which was the Gilgit Agency, the Baltistan agencies, and a bunch of smaller kingdoms that did sort of come together. Now that was on the larger, in the larger sense, a part where the Maharaja of Kashmir and his sort of power did exceed. But if you were to visit those areas today, there's definitely a more nuanced understanding of who they are. It doesn't fall into line with the idea that this is all Kashmir as well. Right? There is this idea of them as like Gilgiti, as Balti, as people who are somewhat separate.
Good point.
Who are somewhat different from Kashmiris, who do not necessarily imagine themselves as part of this Kashmiri imagination. Yes, people on the Pakistani administered side of Kashmir do, which Pakistani state calls Azad Jammu Kashmir. They do, for sure, right? Like, there is this idea of like reunified Kashmir on that side, but Gilgit-Baltistan, they imagine themselves slightly differently, and those areas have been calling for like unification or like inclusion into Pakistan proper, right?
Okay.
And there have been steps that have been taken in that stead as well, right?
Okay.
It's a de facto fifth province,
this is such
basically.
a good point, right?
Yeah.
Because Western pedagogical approach towards Kashmir and the issue of Kashmir has always been, it's part of India, it's India, it's always been India, so it should be with India. And if you call India a colonial state in Kashmir, then like you're not being fair, because how can they be colonial towards Indian people?
Yeah.
But then Balti people, Gilgiti people are a great example that Gilgit-Baltistan used to be part of the larger Kashmir, but now they have their own identities.
For sure.
So this broad brush of painting all Indians and people that live on the Indian subcontinent as one people is so problematic and colonial,
construct.
Because you're just saying this is all like this.
Yeah.
Right.
They're
all us.
I feel like that's again a very Eurocentric idea of like this idea that one political entity and all the people within that political entity have to be the same people, right? It's a very Eurocentric idea.
Just because the Eurocentric ideals cannot understand our people doesn't mean we don't exist.
Yeah.
It's
in
true.
our own selves.
It's true.
It's possible for a pre-colonial India to be conceived as a political entity on the large, but for people living in it to still be very different from each other, right?
Absolutely.
It's one of the most diverse, linguistically, ethnically, religiously diverse places the entire world. And brushing it with one stroke is, and again, nation states tend to do that as well. Pakistan has done that to a great extent by erasing Bengali identity, for example, right?
Exactly.
By deinstitutionalizing Bengali as a national language or as an official language of the state, right?
Right.
You can't do that, really. Like, you cannot institute a language that exists in one part of this whole area and say everyone's going to speak this, and otherwise you're not Pakistani. So again, states do that.
Yeah.
States have a tendency to do that. It's up to us as historians, as people who are critical of those narratives, to like see it otherwise.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. That's how you bring. I think that really speaks to the agency of like
people,
groups of people. Exactly, right.
For sure.
So thank you for that, Shehroze.
No, of course.
I really want to now. Thank you for all of the background context, and thank you for sort of setting the stage for how these tensions have sort of developed. Can you speak a little more to how the recent decades have sort of shifted this landscape even more? How this new landscape has new risks as well as nuclear power that's now involved, and how we sort of got there.
So Pakistan and India have gone to like 3 full-scale wars. 4 full-scale wars, 3 over Kashmir, the 4th over Bangladesh. Wonder what that was about, Lubaba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? It's a mystery to us all.
Yeah.
No one knows that story.
Yeah.
We love Bangladesh.
Yes. Yeah. We're sorry. The Pakistani state hasn't apologized.
I will.
Yeah.
But we do.
Do you want to look into the camera and apologize to all the Bengali viewers?
Why look at the camera when we have
Yeah.
Bengali person?
They've done their time for me. I'm kidding.
Yeah, okay. As the elected representative of all Bangladeshi people, thank you so much for speaking for all of them.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
I'm getting banned everywhere.
Yes. Asim Munir Saab, I'm sorry. I have a gun to my back if you can't see. Please leave me back in the country.
Yeah, me too. Okay.
But yes, and in 1998, Pakistan also develops nuclear technology and puts it to military use. India had already done that, I think, the decade before. And what that does essentially is, and 1998, the nuclear capabilities develop in Pakistan. In 1999, again, they go to war, right?
Pakistan and India.
Yeah, Pakistan and India. Kargil, huge misadventure on the Pakistani government's part. Like peace was on, the horizon. There was going to be a political agreement to stop tensions across the border. Again, the Pakistani military state sort of goes rogue at the time and just like carries out a misadventure, doesn't end well. But what that sort of 1999, what that sort of does is it raises the stakes for war very much so, because Pakistan also undergoes sanctions for its nuclear program at the same time, right?
Okay.
It begins this time when Pakistan is not looked upon favorably in the rest of the world, and at the same time stakes get a lot higher for like Kashmiri people, because now war on both sides, this little
could be nuclear.
Could be nuclear, right? And
you're just stuck in the middle.
Yeah, literally between rock and a hard place,
Because my question really is, and I guess you plan to speak to this, but my question really is then, it's just like, how do you get anything out of Kashmir? How do you get, like, any voices heard? How do you have, like, anyone except for these two big brothers, like...
Yeah.
But that's where the Kashmiri indigenous-led civil rights, resistance movements, artistic movements come to and they've always been there.
They've always been there, literally, like since the late 1980s, when the insurgency sort of like starts full scale, like it continues to this day, right? And much of that, at least on the Indian side of the Kashmir, Indian occupied Kashmir, it's also in response to enforced disappearances, information blackouts. The fact that the Indian military can detain anybody without cause for however many days they want and then do whatever and nobody asks a question, right? Again, tactics that nation states use to justify their, to consolidate their power on the ground, to consolidate their monopoly on violence on the ground, right? But one of the things that the Indian government has been successful in doing in the past few decades is this like curbing of the internationalization of the Kashmir issue. Basically putting its narrative out in front of the world that Kashmir is an internal issue, that we'll solve ourselves and we'll deal with Pakistan on our own, and at the same time posturing itself to Pakistan as, we will not talk about Kashmir until we talk about terrorism that Pakistan commits in India, right? Again, it's a catch-22. Like
we don't need to go to therapy.
Basically, but if they did,
if they did,
yeah,
there would be so many other options on the table.
Literally, right? But one of the things that has happened recently, which again, like people within the Indian government absolutely hate and people within the Pakistani government are sort of rejoicing about, is this, in the wake of the recent war
in the last 3 weeks.
In the last 3 weeks, when the ceasefire happened, the American government was very forthcoming in telling the world that they were the ones who sort of put the ceasefire in place. Now, India has spent like decades trying to build this narrative of Kashmir as this internal issue, and then Donald Trump goes on Twitter and says, I'll make Pakistan and India talk about Kashmir. The Indian state absolutely hates it, because the idea is you've put Kashmir back on the international table. You've brought international eyes back onto Kashmir.
Let's talk about the fact. This really reminds me again of Israel-Palestine, because you have Israel saying the same thing, that West Bank, it's Judea and Samaria. It's their claim, this ancestral claim to that land, right? Like, which
And that
Like, the international community don't get involved. And you're like, okay, well, and ancestral people that live there, not people whose ancestors are from Poland.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. But in that sense, this recent escalation has sort of made people much more aware of casualties that Kashmiri people go through on a regular basis. Again, like Taha said earlier, the war sort of escalated a lot further when Pakistan proper was attacked, right? Otherwise, shelling across the line of control, it happens every day.
Wow.
It happens literally every week. People get injured. People go into like
That's
lockdowns.
not okay. Like, it's really just not okay.
Yeah, for sure. It sucks.
Yeah.
But that's how life has been, and war only brings some eyeballs to it if the world cares enough.
Exactly.
Right?
There's still that big if, whereas other everyday people are subject to this.
Yes.
Everyday people are being subject to this based on larger powers that are fighting over land, water, whatever it is.
And the fact that recently when Indian missiles were fired into Pakistan, one of the news items that sort of came up for like 5-10 minutes but then sort of disappeared was Pakistan sort of calling its calling a meeting of its National Command Authority. And for people who don't know, the National Command Authority is the body that sort of deals with the use of nuclear weapons on Pakistan's side.
And then we had a ceasefire.
That's when we had a ceasefire.
Because America was like,
no.
Not
this.
Right.
Like
Saudi Arabia was like, no. America was like, no. India was like, no. China was like, excuse me, we've just built so many highways. We plan to use.
The U.S. was like, it's going to be me and Russia first. What do you mean?
Yes.
It's gonna be... Okay.
But point being, what that tells you is countries would rather go to war.
Yeah.
Rather risk civilian lives, rather risk like millions of dollars of equipment, billions of dollars of equipment, and rather risk nuclear war, nuclear annihilation, like mutually assured destruction. That's what we say, right? Rather do that. Then sit down and talk about Kashmir. Then let the Kashmiri people decide. Like again, pick your poison.
Then even internationalize the issue, right?
For sure. So now, Pakistan and India both have sent like delegations across the world to sort of like as diplomacy moves to sort of explain their point of view of the war, of the recent war to the world, right?
So instead of internationalizing the issue, India has decided to propagandize the issue.
Basically.
And then obviously Pakistan will do that as well because you can't have this charm diplomacy, yoga washing of Indian war crimes in Kashmir being spread across the world. And Pakistan is going to be like, well, we also want to shift focus away from our internal issues to focus on this.
I really want to come back to the point of all of this. And that is that, like, especially amongst tensions between Pakistan and India over time, it, like, Kashmiris have sort of had to take a back seat, right? Have been forced to take a back seat in all of these tensions, and they've been the ones that have faced such large losses. But also Kashmir becomes this like collateral in a lot of these tensions. And can you speak to that a little bit and sort of what that has been looking like?
So when I'll talk about it on like in terms of like how things happen on the ground, for example, right? For example, in 2019, I believe, 2019, when the BJP contests for a second term of its election in India, it comes into power on the manifesto that it would revoke Kashmir's special status. That's something that they put into their manifesto, and then they win a landslide majority in India as well.
Modi's second term was won on this.
Was won on this term, right? So again, it speaks to this like, you know...
It's a structure test.
Basically what... the RSS mission that sort of started in Kashmir in 1947 with the Jammu massacre, it sort of like, again, 52 years later, 62 years later, in 2019, Modi sort of brings that to fruition. So it's a long-term, like, and it speaks to the large-scale capitulation that Indian liberals and the left in India have had when it comes to something like Kashmir, that the revocation of Kashmir's special status sort of happens unanimously almost, right? But in the days preceding that, what that looks like on the ground for Kashmiris is that there's an information blackout. There's people, political opposition, civil society leaders, like known and like suspected members of the resistance being rounded up and locked into jails, state of curfew being imposed and stuff like that. Now that
internet blackout, media blackout,
yeah, and that's something that does happen in Kashmir like a lot. Like this was a massive scale operation to sort of curb dissent while the Indian government was passing the law or like revoking its status. But
2019.
2019. Yes.
5 years, like
Yes.
6 years ago.
Yes.
But like.
Yeah, but this is by that time that was like also normal service in Kashmir, right? The Armed Services and Public Safety Act in Kashmir gave the armed forces the right to detain anybody.
I mean, if 20 years prior to that was when nuclear arms were coming into the picture, like, of course you're in a state of fight or flight, right?
No, I mean, you've traumatized people, you put them in flux, and then just like with Israel, you were basically defending this arbitrary detention, forced disappearances, media blackouts, surveillance by saying we get attacked by these people, but you're not taking into account the fact that why are these people attacking you? Why did people in Boston back in the 1700s rise up against the British Crown? Everybody loves the musical Hamilton. Nobody wants to actually talk about the fact of what colonialism does to people.
Everybody is a Star Wars fan until the real life.
They realize they are the empire.
Basically. But there's a lot of Kashmiri writers, Kashmiri authors, Kashmiri like journalists who've written a lot about this. Some we've mentioned. For what the experience of Kashmiri people on the ground has been, I would encourage people to read more. I can't speak to that. I'm a academic. I'm someone who has academic expertise, but I'm not someone who's living there on the ground. A lot of what I've spoken is like stuff that I've learned from Kashmiri authors, from Kashmiri scholars.
Right.
So I would just recommend people read people like Azadi Sir, read people like Hafsa Kanjwar. These are people who do a lot of great work when it comes to archival work, in terms of like journalistic work. So like,
and these are Kashmiri people themselves. Yeah, and these are the voices we should be amplifying,
for
right?
Sure.
Especially if this issue is now able to be internationalized.
Yes.
Like that's the first place we should be going, right?
For sure.
I think that's where we're going to pause for today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shehroze, for joining us for these last 2 episodes. I think this has been a really important conversation that is so pertinent. It is so timely. It is essential to our knowledge and understanding as global citizens. To my understanding as a researcher, as an activist, as someone who does work in South Asian community organizing spaces. And I think, especially speaking to my experience as a South Asian organizer, these are gaps in my knowledge of people from the region that I'm from, right? And like these are experiences that have been hidden away, that have been silenced, that have been put into the shadows for a reason, for a purpose, so deeply that I'm like learning all of this as we're speaking on this podcast, right? I'm really understanding the breadth of what has happened and the turmoil that has occurred in this entire process, right?
Because you had mentioned that this was one topic where you wanted to be more so in the sort of like the questioning backseat and ask questions, because it is so... Like, we heard about it a lot growing up in Pakistan, and I'm sure we had to unlearn a lot and then learn from Kashmiri scholars. And then, like, for a lot of the diaspora people, like, I think it's, like, not discussed.
No, it's really not. Like, the majority of what I've come to understand about Kashmir has been shared with me from my friends who are Pakistani, who are Indian, especially by my friends who have spent a decent amount of their life living in South Asia, right? Like, I moved to North America when I was less than 2 years old. I didn't grow up in Bangladesh, right? I didn't experience the same types of like conversations that we would be having back home about these specific histories, right?
Yeah. No, you grew up where Chapel Roan grew up.
Yes, exactly. I was the original Midwestern princess. I also have red hair. but all that to say, like, I think this is a really important part of the picture that we're coloring. And I think that speaks to how it's important in the South Asian community, how it's important in like progressive social justice communities,
Yeah,
in community
absolutely.
organizing spaces, and in spaces where like these colonial ideologies, it's not always white people, right?
Yeah.
These colonial ideologies have been so embedded in some
Yes.
of our communities, and we need to be able to unearth them and to
Yeah.
be able to actually find justice and liberation for all of us, right? None
Yeah.
of us are free until all of us are free.
Yes.
And Kashmir is an integral part of that. If Palestine is a heartbeat, like Kashmir is also like lungs, right? Like it's an essential organ that we need to be paying attention to if we
Yeah.
are to achieve justice in other areas of
And
the world.
resistances in both areas do learn from each other as
Exactly.
well.
There,
right?
that's such a good point. Yeah.
So if resistance, people resisting on the ground can learn from each other, allies need to learn from each other as
Exactly.
well.
Absolutely.
All the
That's
more
my
powerful.
1 rupee opinion. You know, just saying.
Thank you so much, Rose, for joining us.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this has been another wonderful episode of The
Yes.
Third Take. We'll have to have Shehroze back on the show. We'll have to have other wonderful subject experts on the show as well. So thank you for kicking us off.
Of course.
Love
Thank
it.
you so much.
Thank you so much.
And I'm Lubaba,
Taha.
Shehroze.
and this has been The Third Take. Make sure you follow us on Spotify, rate us 5 stars, like, comment.
Click
And
the
if
bell
you-
icon on YouTube.
Yes, click the
all
bell
the buttons.
icon.
Oh my gosh. Well, definitely follow us on Instagram for more updates. It's at The Third Take Pod. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.